Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning into the show. This is your host, Adelia Kirchner, and you are listening to Subtle Rampage.
Warning, the following program contains critical thinking, honest opinions, viewpoints on culture that may seem conservative, and a positive view on absolute detestable things such as marriage and children. Listener discretion is advised.
Well, hello everybody, and happy Thanksgiving week. By now, I'm sure all of you chefs of the family have taken your turkeys out to thaw and sent your teenage son, or your neighbor's daughter, or your third cousin's niece's brother 4 times removed to the grocery store for that one last thing that will inevitably not be the last thing, because today is not Thanksgiving, tomorrow is. And not to play on your biggest fears or anything, but I'm personally like 99.9% sure that you're forgetting something. But you know, that's just how Thanksgiving works. That's just like the circle of life. Speaking of the circle of life, I was thinking earlier, before I did this episode, right? I was like, if I could tell people one thing that would be beneficial in their lives right now, what would that be? And I was like, oh, I know. Let's go back to the company that instills the highest morals and values in our children to this day, Disney. And if you couldn't tell, that was sarcasm. But let's go back to the Lion King, okay? Hakuna Matata. What a great phrase. No worries for the rest of your days. And I think more people need to remember that. When you're sitting at the Thanksgiving dinner table this week, or the Thanksgiving lunch table, or the Thanksgiving brunch table, I know some of you are very popular human beings, so you might have to hit up like 3 or 4 Thanksgivings before the day is over. But when you're sitting there with your group of friends, or your extended family, or your immediate family that you haven't seen because you've been at school, or whatever it is, okay? When you're sitting there, and you can tell that if you just say the one word, the one phrase that you're just itching to say, you know that if you say that, the person across from you at that table is just gonna jump up and lose their blasted mind. Okay, you know you have that control over somebody. And odds are, okay, there's somebody sitting at that table that has that control over you as well. And that's just what's so crazy to me about Thanksgiving, is the amount of people getting together with other people that do not agree with each other whatsoever. And we all know how often this ends disastrously, of course, but I do think that there's a certain beauty to it, and there's a certain intimacy to it, because it's like, if you know what's gonna flip somebody's lid, or if they know what's gonna flip yours, doesn't that mean you're kind of on a more personal level than you are with the large majority of the population? Okay? There's something to that relationship. Even if it is malice or frustration, at least there's something there, right? But that's really all besides the point. What I'm really getting at here is that when you're sitting there debating whether or not to let somebody put you in a bad mood, or debating whether or not, you should say something that you probably shouldn't say, just remember the phrase, Hakuna Matata. No worries for the rest of your days, okay? There you go. I have solved all of your familial dysfunction. I've solved all of your holiday problems. This can even be applied to Christmas if you're, a celebrator of that. Okay? There's a lot of wisdom in what I'm sharing right now. I just want you to take note of that, okay? Anyways, now that we've got the positivity out of the way, the goodwill, Christian approach of don't cause any issues at the Thanksgiving dinner table because that's not, proper behavior or whatever. Now that we've got that out of the way, I would like to discuss a topic that would very well be my trigger at the Thanksgiving dinner table. So let's get into that. This topic is one that a particular group of people consistently worries about, consistently, probably every day. It's how they live their lives is out of fear of this thing. Usually they use the sentence, the world is burning, and then they follow it up with something along the lines of, the world is burning, which is why you need to drink your coffee out of a soggy straw. And you go, okay, yummy. I've always wanted to taste paper while I'm drinking my coffee. That sounds delectable. Or they use, the world is burning, which is why you need to buy an electric car. And it's like, wow, you're so smart. Because I thought that the gas car that I bought, I thought that was too cheap. Even though I couldn't afford anything more, I thought it was too cheap. So spending money I don't have on an electric vehicle that I might not even always be able to charge, that sounds like a really good idea, thank you. Or my favorite, and the one that is my trigger at the Thanksgiving dinner table, and don't get me wrong, I can hold myself together pretty well. I probably wouldn't get too out of line, but here's my favorite. The world is burning, which is why we need to stop having children. Like, huh? Sir. Ma'am, I'm gonna need you to slow your roll. What was that? I heard somebody the other day. I didn't like what they were saying, but I did like the expression. You need to slow your French toast, or something like that. And I was like, that makes absolutely no sense, but I'm gonna start saying that. So yeah, sir, ma'am, slow your French toast, okay? What on earth are you talking about? I mean, the paper straws were already a stretch, but now you're saying that the world is burning, and because of that, we can't have any more children. I mean, are you scared yet? 'Cause you should be. I mean, the world is burning right now. And what are you thinking about? Casserole? Deep-fried turkey? Pie? I mean, for God's sakes, okay? Get your priorities in line. What is wrong with you? But in all seriousness, there's this prevalent narrative of climate change, and that's linked to this prevalent narrative of overpopulation, and that's kind of where you just get a bunch of people who are like, having children is bad. And just in general, our society currently doesn't really like the idea of having children, doesn't necessarily think it's the best option, actually encourages people to not have children and just focus on themselves, as if the human race can continue on like that forever. But while overpopulation isn't the only reason that people give for being of this opinion that having children is not a good thing, it is one of the ones that I find is pitched most often in the realm of academia. I would say particularly that narrative, and the one that focuses on, well, you're a woman, you should have a career, your man should have a career, you should both be very career-oriented, and, where do children fit in that? And it's like, well, they don't. And it's like, wow, you're spot on, that's right, don't have any kids, because they don't fit in that, and that is the proper way to live, because you're in college, and that is the goal. And it's like, okay, sounds great. Sounds like a joyful and fulfilling lifestyle. Thank you so much for the advice, academia. But one of the things that I kind of wanted to touch on here is I feel like there's kind of this disconnect. I mean, there's obviously so many disconnects between the left and the right politically, but I feel like there's this really big disconnect on the whole climate change thing. Because I feel like it's kind of just this, the right doesn't really see why it matters, and then the left is like, no, it's the end of the world is burning, what is wrong with you? And then the right goes, the world isn't burning, and then the left goes, why don't you believe us? We have scientists, we have research, the world is going to burn, and carbon footprint this, and carbon footprint that, right? Okay, so, it's like, we've got one side freaking out because they're scared, and then the other side is like, why are you scared? There's nothing there. I mean, did you see a ghost? The ghost of climate change past or something? What is that, the Ice Age? I don't know. But either way, it's like, okay, where climate change crisis activists believe climate change to be this abnormal thing, I feel like there's a lot of people who are like, is it really that abnormal? Do we even know that it's abnormal? Like, yeah, you've got your research sitting there, I can see it, but like, you know, what about things like the Ice Age? What about the fact that, you know, in some places it used to snow and now it doesn't? In some places it didn't used to snow and now it does. And it's like, what about the fact that sometimes it does occasionally snow in Florida? Is that something to be worried about? Like, I don't know. Is it really that big of a deal? I feel like a lot of things change over time. Why wouldn't climate change? I feel like, you know, if they say that the platelets of the Earth shift over decades and centuries and whatever, why wouldn't climate also shift? Like, there's a million different factors in how nature works. Why are we trying to control it? But there's people who are like, what does our carbon footprint have to do with any of this, right? And then, in the same vein, where climate change crisis activists seem to claim that the end of the world, okay, is in our hands, that we can control it somehow, that we can prevent it or delay it or whatever, okay? The idea that the end of the world is in our hands as a collective, I mean, not everybody agrees with that. That's just the reality, and I mean, I'll get into why in a few minutes, but, you know, not everybody thinks that we are in control of everything. A strange concept, I know. I think another thing is that, like, kind of how I mentioned with the paper straws and the electric cars and everything earlier, the proposed outcomes of all of this are so drastic. The world is gonna end. Everything's gonna burn. Like, this is the end of the world. And everybody's gonna go up in flames. Okay, like, the proposed outcomes are so drastic. But the actions that we're supposed to take to prevent these outcomes are nowhere even close to being equally as drastic. Okay? Like, that's just, it just doesn't add up, okay? It doesn't make logical sense, okay? If, you know, if the elite or the researchers or whoever, you know, really believed that there was a crisis, would they not be doing more than telling us to drink out of paper straws all day while they fly their private jets around? Like, if I was personally the one who discovered that the world was about to go up in flames because, you know, nobody was doing what we could do to prevent it, okay, and I thought that we could control it, you know, the first thing I would be doing is not making people drink out of paper straws and telling them to, you know, use reusable grocery bags. That's not even, like, what? Like, if something that drastic is going to happen, why are these the measures that are being taken? Like, I know it's technically like, oh, well, it's not gonna happen tomorrow, but, like, still. And yes, I know that, you know, reusable grocery bags and paper straws, and there's all these minor things that you can do in general. Whether or not you're worried about the climate crisis, okay, these are things that you can do in general to kind of be more environmentally friendly. That's fine. Whatever. I'm just going based off of the people that I have encountered personally who are, like, all, involved in the climate change narrative, who immediately start telling me about all these small steps they're taking, while also saying that having kids is the worst decision ever. Like, I'm just talking about people who are conflating the two. Like, this is the solution to the world burning, and it's like, no, it's not. Can you share whatever it is that you're on right now? Because you're not making much sense, and I feel like the only way that I will understand a single word of what you're saying is if you share. But, yeah. You know, and somebody who fully agrees with all the climate change stuff, they might listen to me talk and say that I obviously haven't done my research on this and I sound stupid, and, you know, maybe I do, but you know what? And this might irk some people, but I don't care. That's it. I don't care. I don't care about any of this. And you want to know why I don't care? Because I don't think I can control climate change. I don't think that we can control the end of the world. I don't think the end of the world is in our hands. And honestly, I think that if we do look at climate change from a Christian worldview, I mean, as Christians, we acknowledge that we're supposed to take care of the earth and that we're not supposed to trash it, that we're supposed to care for the animals. Like, there are certain things that we can acknowledge. But I feel like if you're going to acknowledge all of that and you're going to call yourself a Christian, you kind of also have to acknowledge that the end of the world is not in your hands. It's not in the hands of any human being. Okay? There are things that we do not control. And I mean, the audacity of some people to think that it's their place to control things like, population. Like, what? I'm sorry, sir. What? And I also think that as Christians, we should kind of consider the pointlessness of fearing or worrying about something like this. I mean, the way that I interpret it, God tells us to fear him for a reason. And I think that that is partially so we don't have to constantly fear a bunch of other random stuff. Because, if you've watched what's happened over the last couple of years, it's fairly obvious, but I mean, there's a lot of other things that people are afraid of besides COVID. But, this is a very obvious example. Okay, how easy is it for people to live a life out of fear? And how enjoyable is that life really? I'm just saying, like, is that an enjoyable time to be constantly afraid of something? And I think that part of the reason that God tells us to fear him is so that we don't have to, live a miserable life of constantly being afraid of every little thing. So, you can take that for what it is, but as far as overpopulation goes, my question is, okay, wouldn't God have put, like, some sort of default switch in our bodies for, like, natural birth control / sterilization, okay, that would, like, turn on once the world got too overpopulated, if overpopulation was a thing? I mean, if that sounds crazy to you, then whatever, but I'm just saying, like, if God made our bodies the way that he made them, and if, God is, like, perfect, and he's the creator, and he made everything a certain way, and he was so meticulous with our bodies that there's so many crazy things that we don't even understand about them, I just feel like, in a way, if you're saying that overpopulation is, like, something we need to be worried about, then God messed up. God really messed up there. He didn't make the earth big enough. Or, he made the earth big enough, he just forgot to put that little default switch in us that made us stop populating the earth. Like, it's just kind of like this thing where it's like, it doesn't make sense. There's also so much in the Bible, like, about children, about raising them, about teaching them. I mean, we're told to be fruitful and multiply. And I'm not quite sure how you can read all of that and not see the importance of children in society. Not see the importance of children in a family. Not see how having children, how caring for children, how teaching children affects the adults in that child's life. How that can cause an adult to grow spiritually, can cause the adult to grow developmentally. Like, there's all these benefits that children bring to our world and the way that we function. And if you read the Bible and if you believe that God is a perfect God, I just don't see how you can be like, oh, the world is too overpopulated, it's gonna burn, therefore, no more kids. And I know that some of you may be listening and going, this is kind of all null and void. She's talking about Christians having this opinion. Christians don't have this opinion. And you know what? If that is what you are thinking, you would be wrong. Because perhaps you have not met a Christian who identifies with the political left. Perhaps you have not discussed any issues of politics, any issues of Christianity with somebody who identifies as a Christian as well as part of the LGBTQ+ community. Perhaps you have not stepped foot near the world of academia in the last 60 years or something along those lines. Like, I don't know here, but I can guarantee you that there are plenty of Christians out there who buy into this stuff. In fact, To close us out, I'll give you a little anecdote, okay? I like to tell it at parties. It really cheers everybody up, especially parties with lots of homeschool mothers. It really puts them in a good mood. But I'll stop talking up the story. I'll just tell it now. Anyways, while enrolled at a Christian university, of which there are many here in the Bible Belt and really across the nation, of course, I took a creative writing course. And, people might be like, oh, well, you took a creative writing course, what did you expect? Well, I took a creative writing course at a Christian school, so what I expected wasn't necessarily to be told right off the bat that I could actually write smut if I wanted to. If I wanted to write sexually explicit adult content that really doesn't belong anywhere, even the internet, I could. And seeing as how the format of the class was kind of a workshop, I could also consequently force my fellow Christian classmates to read the smut that I would write, hypothetically. And that's all I'll say on that part, because that's not really what this episode is about. But let's get into the part of the story that this episode is about. So, one day I go into class, I'm prepared to talk about the short stories we read because we're supposed to be learning from certain works for our class exercises, etc. That's how school is. You do homework, you discuss. But anyway, so I walk in, we discuss some of the short stories, it's going fine, there's a bit of feminism content thrown in there, but it's fine. There might have been one that touched on racism, but it was fine. We were getting through it. It was going smoothly. And then don't even ask me how it happened, okay? Don't even ask me. Because honestly, looking back on it, I feel like it was completely out of context. I don't know if it was, but this professor, she starts verbally patting herself on the back for the fact that her and her husband, when they got married, they decided not to have any children. And I'm like, okay, great, whatever. Why does that matter? She keeps talking, okay? And she's just like, my generation messed up, and this lady's like probably in her 50s, I'm not entirely sure. But she's like, my generation messed up, they shouldn't have had any children, it should have ended with us. She's like, but a lot of people in my generation were very selfish, and they had children. And I was just kind of listening to this lady talk, and I'm like, okay, don't know where this came from, but sure. And she just keeps talking, and then we get to the reason why nobody should have children, and why her generation, should have just stopped it there. And her reason was, overpopulation and climate change. Because, in her words, the world is burning. And, I kind of was like, okay, well, maybe at a secular school I wouldn't bring this particular point up, but in a Christian school, it makes sense. So I kind of brought up my opinions on how Christians should approach this stuff. I was pretty much just like, two things. Doesn't God want us to have children? And then also, isn't it kind of in God's hands? I really don't think it's in our hands, because if God wanted to end the world yesterday, he would have. If he wanted to end the world 100 years ago, he would have. If he wanted to end the world tomorrow, or in 20 years, or in 50 years, or whenever he wants to end the world is when it will end. You and I have no control over this. It is in God's hands. But I said that, very cordially, very polite, if you will, okay? And and she just kind of nodded her head and was like, okay, and moved on. Okay, we moved on to the next subject, right? And that was that for that class. And then the next week, I went to that same class, and me and this other girl were just still kind of getting to know each other. This was still at the beginning of the semester, kind of. And we had kind of discovered that we were both the oldest of 7 children. And this professor had us all introduce ourselves and talk about our families and talk about our experiences. And so she also knows that me and this girl are both the oldest of 7 children. We are both part of large families according to today's standards, right? Okay. But on this particular day, me and this girl were just kind of bonding. We were talking about our siblings. We were talking about what it's like to be the oldest of that many kids. And then, she was kind of talking about her mom and how amazing her mom is and how strong her mom is. And I was like, yeah, you have to be a pretty strong mother. And both of our mothers homeschooled all of us. So we were like, oh my goodness, twinsies, all right? And then we kind of got on the subject of when people feel the need to make unnecessary comments to our parents. Like, well, why did you have that many kids? Maybe you shouldn't have had that many kids. Did you ever think about not having that many kids? And it's like, those comments are so unnecessary, but we're just kind of joking around, right? And it's like, well, okay, if you have a problem with how many kids there are, which one would you rather not exist? But, we were just kind of making light of something that's kind of frustrating, right? And then, our professor, who wasn't even a part of this conversation, right? She kind of chimes in, and I don't remember how exactly she, nudged her way into the conversation, but immediately, right off the bat, it was very clear that she did not agree with the lifestyles that both me and this girl, that our families have. She did not agree with the amount of kids. She doesn't even agree that our parents should have had kids. But she continued on and made it very clear to me that, what I had said the week before, she wholeheartedly disagreed with me, and that there was multiple ways to have a Christian perspective. And I was kind of like, well, yeah, on certain things, but not this. It's like, there's multiple ways to have a Christian perspective on the Trinity, but I'm not so sure there's multiple ways to have a Christian perspective on abortion. I don't know what you want me to tell you. There's certain things that are just, they don't line up with Christianity. That's just the way it is. I mean, what's even the point of being a Christian if you're just still okay with everything else? And I know I'm getting kind of heated here, but this is why I preface this by saying this is probably my Thanksgiving dinner table trigger. Okay, but anyways, so she says all this, right? And then she continues on, and I want you to hear me loud and clear, okay? This female professor straight up told our class of, female students, she was like, I feel strongly convicted that it is part of my purpose in life to make sure that my female students understand that they do not have to have children. I don't want them to ever feel like they have to have children. And she went on this whole spiel about sexism and misogyny and the patriarchy and all this stuff, right? And the other girl that I had been talking to before the professor kind of chimed in, she kind of goes, hey, well, actually, I think that more women our age are actually disgusted by the idea of having children than aren't. And that's kind of worrisome to me. So I don't think that the whole idea of not having kids is something that needs to be encouraged or needs to be told to people. I think they're fully aware, because she's like, most of the women my age don't want to be mothers. So I don't know that that's really something you need to encourage. The conversation, it didn't really go anywhere effective. It didn't really go anywhere fruitful. Our professor was just kind of boiling mad for most of it. I mean, she was already heated at the very start of it. We didn't even bring any of it up, but she was ready to talk about it. She was obviously still upset from the previous week. But I think my kind of question here is she loves her job. She's been doing her job as a professor for decades now, which is, slightly concerning, but but she loves her job, right? And she constantly talks about how much she loves her job, how much she loves us as her students, right? Ma'am, it's a good thing our parents made the selfish decision to have children, otherwise you wouldn't have a job. Am I wrong? Am I wrong? She wouldn't have a job if none of us existed. And I was like, and then also my question here is, why do you think that people should have stopped having kids in your generation? I didn't hear you say anything about how you think your parents' generation should have been the one to stop having kids. Is that maybe because if you had said that, then that would mean that you didn't get to exist? I just don't understand. How come you get to exist You get to live your full life. You get to, get to the ripe old age. You get to publish novel. You get to publish poetry. You get to do this stuff. But according to you, I should have never had the chance to do anything. And that's where I think people don't really realize what exactly is coming out of their mouth when they say it, right? But, that's all I'm going to really share of the story, I guess. There's a million other things that were said, whatever. It ultimately came down to just me and this other girl just kind of deciding to let it go and be like, okay, yeah, of course you're not meaning to be offensive, no, it's fine. We're all good. There's no bad blood. Because what are you going to do? If somebody just wants to get upset about something and doesn't want to listen to you, then you can't really do much about that. If they're not willing to listen, they're not willing to listen. But I guess there's just one last thing I want to say. Okay, if you are an adult and you have children who are going off to college, who are in college, whatever, if you are personally in college right now, if you know anybody who is in college, okay, and they're at a secular school, if they're at a public university, whatever it is, they're most definitely going to be exposed to something along these lines, whether it's this obvious or whether it's more subtle, at some point in their college experience. They will. I can guarantee it. And if they're in a Christian school, do not, and I repeat, do not let your guard down. Don't send your kid to a Christian school and go, oh, well, it's Christian, so they'll be perfectly fine. On one of the occasions that I was initially ranting about this experience with this professor, one of my friends said to me something along the lines of well, you need to be more careful almost in a Christian environment than you do in a non-Christian environment. She's like, because when you walk into a secular school, when you walk into something that is deemed secular, something that is deemed of this world, you have your guard up. You're prepared. You know what you're walking into. You know that it's not safe. But if something has the title of being Christian, if something is a church, okay, if something is a Christian camp, a Christian school, you let your guard down. And I hadn't necessarily thought about it like that before, but she's absolutely right. I mean, if you're going to a speech and debate thing, okay, where they say everybody at the speech and debate competition will be arguing with you. They will be debating you. They will be on the opposing side. You are on your own. What are you going to do? I mean, you might run away, but if you're the type of person that would go to the competition anyways, okay, what are you going to do? You're probably going to spend as much time as possible preparing, researching, having your sources straight. You're going to be so ready to hold your own. But if you're supposed to go to a speech and debate competition and they tell you, everybody here is on your side. You're not even going to be fighting against anybody. There's nobody here to debate you. There's nobody here to be on the opposition. It's all you guys on the same side. And you show up under the impression that you all think the same, that you all are fighting for the same thing. And then all of a sudden somebody gets up on stage to argue against you. I mean, what are you going to do? What are you going to say? You weren't prepared. I mean, you spent the last 3 weeks binge watching Teen Wolf and filling your stomach with Pringles. I mean, what are you gonna do? You thought you were safe. You thought you didn't have to stand up for your belief. You thought you didn't have to hold your own because everybody was on the same side. But the reality is that everybody's not on the same side, and I think the reality is that when your guard is not up, when your child's guard is not up, that's when Satan shows up. And whether or not that's subtle or obvious, whether or not that even makes a difference, depending on how strong your child is in their stance, depending on how strong you are in your stance, who knows? But I'm just wanting people to realize that these issues in our society, these issues in our culture, they're contagious. It's a freaking infection, okay? It's an infectious disease, and it's a pandemic more so than COVID ever was. Anyways, thanks for tuning in and hanging around for the longer listening experience this time. Turns out I can talk longer than I thought I could. Who knew? Also, don't forget that new episodes of Subtle Rampage come out every week on Wednesday mornings. Again, thank you for listening, and I hope you'll tune in next week.